Saskia the Unyielding, one of the 4-color commanders from Commander 2016. She is a 3/4 legendary human soldier with vigilance and haste. As Saskia the Unyielding enters the battlefield, choose a player. Whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to the chosen player. And choose that and review that text very carefully. It just says a player. So if you choose one opponent and attack that opponent is going to receive double the combat damage. This is MTG Burgeoning's Saskia the Unyielding EDH Commander deck tech. Okay, now with Saskia the Unyielding introduced, let's get down to this deck tech and its focus. What this is going to be, this is a Saskia token deck. We are going to amass tokens. We are going to do some things with these tokens, anything that you can imagine, and Saskia is going to act as our general. So let's begin with our mana base. Okay, so we're running 4 colors, so we're going to need to have a pretty diverse mana base. So we're going to start 3 plains. You're going to see a little bit of a trend here. 3 swamps, basic variety, of course. 3 mountains. And 3 forests. So that's a quick 12 basic lands to start off this EDH Commander deck tech. Now our next 6 lands are all going to be the check land variety. We've got a Sun Petal Grove, a Clifftop Retreat, a Woodland Cemetery, a Rootbound Crag, an Isolated Chapel, and a Dragon Skull Summit. They check to see if they have the appropriate basic land type in play, and if so, they come into play untapped. So we have 6 copies. I'm sorry, not 6 copies. We have 6 different check lands. 1 check land. 6 check lands to bring our total land count up to 18. Okay, shoom, we got our 6 check lands. All right, next up, we will have 6 different shock lands, starting with a Godless Shrine, Temple Garden, a Stomping Ground, the Sacred Foundry, Overgrown Tomb, and a Blood Crypt. So we got the maximum number of check lands and the maximum number of shock lands that we can put into this 4-color deck so far. And a few other lands to help out the basic land type specific mana of this deck. We have 1 copy of Cinderglade, which if you look carefully, that says Mountain Forest, so that will definitely help with our check lands. Cinderglade, Smoldering Marsh, Swamp Mountain, and Canopy Vista, Forest Plains. All right, next up. Now our land total is at 27. Next up, if you recall, this is a token build of Saskia. So let's throw a token producing land into play. From Throne of Eldraine, we have Castle Ardenvale. Enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a plains. We got a lot of them here, as you can see. Tap for a white or tap 2 and 2 white to create a 1/1 white human creature token. Castle of Ardenvale. Now, if we're running tokens, which means we're going to have a lot of creatures in play, a lot of creatures under the battlefield, on the battlefield under our control. What better land to include than a Gaia's Cradle? Tap to add a green to our mana pool for each creature we control. Gaia's Cradle, automatic include. All right, next up. Again, we're running 4 colors, so we're going to need to try to diversify our mana as best we can. And the following couple lands, we're going to hopefully help to do that. Exotic Orchard. Now, as much as it pains to say this, there hopefully aren't too many games at the commander table where you sit down and every opponent's playing mono blue. So this most likely will give us one or maybe four of each one of the colors that we need to cast the spells in this deck. Exotic Orchard. Of course, after that, best land in the format, Command Tower. And then after that, we've got a Prismatic Vista. This will be our basic land fetch land. We got 12 of them, so we should be able to find something. In addition to a Fabled Passage, which will do the same thing, and if we have at least 4 lands in play, then it'll come into play untapped after we fetch for a basic. All right, now lastly, we have 5 lands remaining, and each of these lands produce colorless mana. Now, there's somewhat of a risk here, especially when we're running a 4-color deck, to not include too many lands that have non-colored mana, if it produces colorless or generic mana. So the benefits of these lands have to outweigh that potential risk. And for the purposes of this set of lands, I think the upside is worth the risk of the colorless mana. So let's start with Grim Backwoods. Tap for a colorless, or we tap 2 and a Golgari and tap to sacrifice a creature, and we can draw a card. We're going to have an abundance of creatures, so sacrificing one of them to draw a card is not going to be a burden. Again, playing on the theme of tokens, we have from Shadows over Innistrad, Westvale Abbey. Tap for a colorless, or we're going to tap 5, pay a life to put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield. Or, and more likely, we're going to tap 5, sacrifice 5 creatures, and transform Westvale Abbey, and then untap it. And for anyone who is not sure what Westvale Abbey transforms into, well, it transforms into Ormondal, the Profane Prince, a 9/7 legendary demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. And if you noticed the text where it said transform and then untap it, this baby is attacking the turn it's transformed. 9/7 flying, indestructible, lifelink, haste. Not bad for sacking 5 tokens, which is what we're going to end up doing in this deck. Oh, what? Come on, get in there. Oh, jeez. All right, hang on one second here. Need to do the old double card sleeve trick. Okay, there we go. Oh, those transforming cards. All right, next up, Reliquary Tower. Tap for a colorless and gives us no maximum hand size. And we have the propensity to draw an awful lot of cards in this deck, so having no maximum hand size, that is a benefit. Kessig Wolf Run from Innistrad. Tap for a colorless, tap X, a red and a green, and tap the land, and target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. And if we've got this baby, if we have a synced up Gaia's Cradle and an army of tokens, this is one of the best lands in the deck. Kessig Wolf Run. And lastly, Gavany Township, another land from Innistrad. Tap for a colorless, or we tap 2 and Selesnya colors and tap the land to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Okay, so that's the land base for the Saskia token deck. Let's pause, take a moment, clear out the lands, and bring on the next set. Okay, so that's the land base for the deck. Now let's transition to some artifact ramp that we have here. Of course, we're going to run a Soul Ring. 1 colorless for 2 colorless. Can't beat that. 4-color deck will love to include a copy of Arcane Signet. Tap for 1 mana of any color of our commander's identity. So for Saskia, that's 1 of any of those colors. Beautiful. And we will include a copy of Felwar Stone. This is like an exotic orchard, just in artifact form. And again, Hopefully, you're not sitting down to a commander table with 3 to 5 mono blue players. And another form of ramp for us, not necessarily, well, I shouldn't say necessarily, it's not an artifact, it's an enchantment, and that's going to be the Growing Rights of Itlimoc. For 2 and a green, this legendary enchantment from Ixalan reads, whenever this comes into play, look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into our hand, put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. That's not a terrible way to get a creature into our hand, but it's not the primary reason why this card is in our deck. At the beginning of our end step, if we control 4 or more creatures, which as you're going to see, that's not going to be hard to do at all, we get to transform Growing Rights of Itlimoc. And what does it transform into? Well, if you can believe it, it transforms into a better copy of Gaia's Cradle. It does exactly what Gaia's Cradle does, except it can tap for a solitary green mana in addition to what Gaia's Cradle already does. Amazing land. Amazing to be able to have 2 of these in play at the same time. This and the Gaia's Cradle. So Growing Rights of Itlimoc will act as some additional ramp for us in this deck. So it's 3 artifact spells and that enchantment. Alright, let's look for our next few cards, which are going to be some tutors and some draw. So we have, because we have so many tokens, and so many of them are going to be expendable, Diabolic Intent. 1 and a black as an additional cost, sacrifice a creature, which for our purposes will probably re-sacrifice a token creature. Search our library for a card and put it into our hand. This is pretty much just a demonic tutor that we also have to sacrifice a creature for. And speaking of a demonic tutor-like ability, we have Runescar Demon. 5 and 2 black, a 6/6 flying demon. When it enters the battlefield, search our library for a card and put it into our hand. Couple of tutors, and to top off that portion, we have a nice card draw spell here. Camaraderie from Guilds of Ravnica for 4 and a Selesnya. This sorcery reads, we gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures we control. Creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This spell can be a ridiculous amount of life gain and card advantage, which is one of the reasons why we have Reliquary Tower in the deck. Because we easily could draw a couple dozen cards. So, Camaraderie, definitely in the same subset as our Diabolic Intent and Runescar Demon. So that's our tutoring and some card draw. Alright, so we're getting closer and closer to our token army, but before we get there, let's talk about the removal we have for this deck, because we got to make sure that we don't allow our opponents to get too much of an army too quickly. So let's start with the best removal in the format, Swords to Plowshares. For a white, exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Not a problem in Commander. Path to Exile, this is 1B to Swords to Plowshares 1A. For a white, exile target creature, and that creature's controller can search their library for a basic land and put it into play tapped. The benefit of this is sometimes that EDH or Commander player, they don't have any basic lands in their deck. So we'll take advantage of that every single day of the week and twice on Friday Night Magic. Anguished Unmaking. Come on, camera, what are we doing here? Lily, are you messing with us here? All right, there we go. All right, so Anguished Unmaking. For 1 in Orzhov, as an instant, exile target non-land permanent, we lose 3 life. Beast Within. 2 and a green, destroy target permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 green beast token. Not a problem for us. Krosan Grip, 2 and a green with the split second mechanic. This should just read, this spell cannot be countered. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Crackling Doom, this is our defense against the Voltron player. 2 damage to each opponent, and then each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. Utter End, we get to exile a non-land permanent for 1 more than the cost of an Anguished Unmaking, and we don't lose any life. Merciless Eviction, 4 and an Orzhov, and we get to pick one. Exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all planeswalkers. And finally, Comet Storm. We are going to have the ability to generate an obscene amount of mana in this deck, and Comet Storm can act as one of our win conditions. All right, that is our removal. So let's get to our token spells. Our first set of token makers will be instants, and the first spell will be Fresh Meat. For 3 and a green, as an instant, we can create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each creature put into our graveyard from the battlefield this turn. And trust me, as you're going to see, there's a lot of ways for us to get creatures into the graveyard. Second Harvest, 2 and 2 green. For each creature token we control, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that permanent. So pretty much double your token army. Amazing card. Secure the Wastes. For X and a white, put X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. This card is bonkers, folks. Absolutely bonkers. And finally, from our instance, we have March of the Multitudes. X, a green and 2 white with the Convoke mechanic. Create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. Those are our instants. Next up are our sorceries. And the first one is Sapriling Symbiosis. Come on, camera, get in the game here. For 3 and a green, and a new camera, come on. There we go. For 3 and a green, we may cast this spell anytime we could play an instant for an additional 2 colorless. Put a 1/1 green Sapriling creature token into play for each creature we control. Increasing Devotion, 3 and 2 white. Put 5 1/1 white human creature tokens onto the battlefield. If Increasing Devotion was cast from our graveyard for a flashback cost of 7 and 2 white, put 10 of those tokens into play instead. Conqueror's Pledge, 2 and triple white. With a kicker of 6, we can put 6 1/1 white core soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. If it were kicked, put 12. And finally, the Finale of Glory. X and 2 white. We create X 2/2 white soldier creature tokens with Vigilance. If X is 10 or more, create X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with Flying and Vigilance. This is an amazing, amazing spell for this deck because you're going to see, as if you haven't noticed already, the amount of mana that we can generate. That will not be difficult to get. All right, let's move to our enchantments that will help produce our token army. And the first one is Hammer of Perforos. For 1 and 2 red, legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures we control have haste. Tap 2 in a red, tap this, sack a land, put a 3/3 colorless golem enchantment artifact creature token onto the battlefield. Yes, this can create a token. No, it's not usually the reason it's in here. It's in here because of the haste enabler. Creating the token is beneficial, it can be helpful, but the primary inclusion of this card is the haste enabler. Parallel Lives doubles our tokens. Anointed Procession doubles our tokens. Divine Visitation, any token that comes into play is a 4/4 white angel creature with Flying and Vigilance. So this enables us to create a Serra Angel army. And then the Doubling Season doubles all of our tokens, doubles all of our counters. Next up for our token makers, our Planeswalkers. Xenoghosa the Reveler for 2 and Gruel. For 0 0 loyalty ability, he can create a 2/2 red and green satyr creature token with haste. He can +1, and this is a big one right here, add X mana in any combination of red and or green to our mana pool, where X is the number of creatures we control, and we're going to control a lot of creatures. His Big Bang ability isn't too great for us. Exile the top 7 cards of our library. We may put any number of creature and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. We don't run a lot of true creatures in this deck, so he's more here for gearing up with the mana and the tokens. Veraska the Relic Seeker. For 4 in Golgari, she gives us a 2/2 black pirate creature token with menace for +2. Her -3 destroys an artifact, creature, or enchantment, and we get a treasure token. And if we're lucky enough to hit the -10 ability, target player's life total becomes 1. And lastly, Liliana the Dreadhorde General. For 4 and 2 black, whenever a creature we control dies, draw a card, and we have a lot of ways to get them to die. +1, we put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. We don't mind seeing our creatures go, especially when we can draw 2 cards. And the -9 ability, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. Those are our Planeswalkers. And lastly, we get to the creatures that will make the creature tokens in this deck. And the first one is the Tendershoot Dryad. From Rivals of Ixalan, it has the Ascend mechanic. If we control 10 or more permanents, we get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. That's not going to be a problem. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green Sapriling creature token. Saprilings we control get +2/+2 as long as we have the city's blessing. Requiem Angel. The cycling of tokens that this can make is ridiculous, because pay attention to the text. This 5/5 flying angel from Dark Ascension, whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Not whenever another non-token spirit creature, just non-spirit creature token. With her in play, we could essentially, through our death triggers, create a second army of tokens that become spirits when they die. The Requiem Angel is awesome in this deck. Avenger of Zendikar. For 5 and 2 green, we get a 5/5 elemental that when it enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land we control. And it has the landfall ability that whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature we control. Okay, next up is the Hooded Hydra. For X and 2 green, this Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And when it dies, we put a 1/1 green snake creature token onto the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on it. Has the morph mechanic, 3 and 2 green. If it's turned face up, put 5 +1/+1 counters on Hooded Hydra. And lastly, we have Hangerback Walker. For double X, this construct artifact creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When this dies, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. And plus we can tap 1 and tap this to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And those are the creatures that help us make additional tokens. Alright, so we have all of these spells. We've got instants. We've got sorceries, we've got enchantments, planeswalkers, creatures to make this massive token army. But what are we going to do with these tokens? Well, let's clean up this area here and let's talk about it. Okay, with a nice cleared off board there, let's talk about what are we going to do with all of these token armies. Well, one of the things we can do is we can sacrifice a bunch of them. And here are the spells that's going to allow us to do that. Viscera Seer. Let's sack a token and scry 1. Goblin Bombardment. For 1 and a red, this enchantment from Tempest allows us to sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to any target. Altar of Dementia. Another Tempest original. Sacrifice a creature. Target opponent puts a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. With the amount of tokens we can generate in this deck, milling someone is an afterthought. Ashnod's Altar. Let's sack a token for 2 colorless mana. Phyrexian Altar. An Invasion original. Let's sacrifice a token to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Krav the Unredeemed. This rare from Battle Bond is a 3/3 legendary demon. We can tap a... Come on, camera, what are we doing here? There we go. We can tap a black and sacrifice X creatures to have target player draw X cards and gain X life. Put X +1/+1 counters on Krav the Unredeemed. We can get a ton of value out of this guy. He is just a ridiculous card to put in this token deck. And God Eternal Bantu for 3 and 2 black. This zombie god from Ward of the Spark sports a 5/6 menace body, and when he enters the battlefield, we can sacrifice any number of other permanents tokens, and then draw that many cards. So as we get further and further into the deck, you can see why having a card like Reliquary Tower becomes so important to protect our hand. And if Bantu dies, we can, or is put into exile, we can put it into our library 3rd from top. And that is a bunch of ways for us to sacrifice our creatures, sacrifice our tokens, do some other things with them. What can we do to, I don't know, maximize the effects of those deaths, or do some other things with these creatures when they're already on the way to the graveyard? Well, we have a Skull Clamp. If you're a token player, you knew sooner or later that a Skull Clamp was going to find its way here into this deck tech. For just 1 and an equip of 1, we +1/-1 a token. It dies, we draw 2 cards. As long as we don't have any massive buffers out there, which, I mean, we're looking at the Divine Visitation over there. Chances are, if we've got an army of 4/4s, we're not in too dire need to draw any cards. However, if all of our tokens are 1/1, this really reads tap 1 colorless mana to draw 2 cards. Awesome inclusion. Next up, Zulaport Cutthroat. If we're finding many ways to get rid of our creatures down here, here's a benefit for when they die. When Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature, it's important because not all creatures like this say creature. Some of them will say another non-token creature. But the Zulaport Cutthroat is whenever he or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. Plus, it's also beneficial that it's each opponent and not target opponent. Hexproof is a thing, so we have to keep that in mind. The Blood Artist is a creature that does similar to what Zulaport Cutthroat does, but it's only to target player. That is when any creature dies, but we have it in our minds to kill a lot of our tokens. What's better than having those death triggers double with Teysa Karlov? From Ravnica Allegiance, this legendary human advisor gives us the ability to double our death triggers. So if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Additionally, our creature tokens get vigilance and lifelink. Teysa Karlov for the win. Next up, Aetherworks Marvel. From this Kaladesh mythic rare legendary artifact, says whenever a permanent we control is put into a graveyard, we get an energy. And a permanent is a token. We can tap this and pay 6 energy, look at the top 6 cards of our library, and we may cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost. Free mana is awesome. Grave Pact. For 1 and 3 black, whenever a creature we control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, or when it dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. When we have Teysa and we have that, boy oh boy are we controlling the board, folks. Elenda the Dusk Rose. This mythic rare from Rivals of Ixalan is only a 1/1 lifelinker for 2 and an Orzhov. However, whenever another creature dies, she gets a +1/+1 counter. And then when she dies, we create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power. Maybe we have a doubling season in play. Maybe we have Anointed Procession. Maybe we have Parallel Lives. Elenda the Desk Rose. Oh, baby. She just brings the army. Sir Conrad the Grim from Throne of Eldraine. This guy is just ridiculous. 3 and 2 black for a 5/4 body. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. Altar of Dementia can fuel this. Our tokens dying can fuel this. Sir Conrad the Grim is just an overpowered human knight for this deck. Plus, for every 1 in black we tap, each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. This is a win condition, folks. Sir Conrad the Grim, win condition. Next up we have, here we go, Masarek the Crowl Death Priest for 3 and a Golgari. This 2/2 flying legendary insect shaman says, whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. The combat tricks that we could do with this guy on the battlefield, fetch lands getting sacrificed, tokens getting sacrificed. Masarek is just awesome. You can see as we get further and further into what we're doing with these tokens and how they die and what we're doing with them as they hit the graveyard. It's becoming more and more apparent exactly what we're trying to accomplish with this deck. Next up, another Throne of Eldraine edition. This is Corvall, the Fakehurst King, for 2 and a Jund. This 4/4 flying dragon noble. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, we sacrifice another permanent. That's not going to be a problem with the number of tokens we're going to have. Whenever we sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on him and draw a card. Again, card draw, card draw, card draw. Corvall, the Fakehurst King. And next up, we have Black Market. For 3 and 2 black, whenever a creature dies, this gets a charge counter. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, add a black to our mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. So many creatures are going to die just in this deck. And that's not even including what our opponents are going to be doing. So Black Market is an amazing mana generator. All right, and lastly, from our little subset of what's going to happen when our tokens die, comes this guy. And I'm going to be honest, this guy is pretty sweet. The Deathbringer Thoctor. For 4 and a Rakdos, this 3/3 zombie beast says, whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on him. Remove a +1/+1 counter from him. He deals 1 damage to any target. Can you imagine what this could do with a doubling season in play? With all the number of creatures that are going to be dying? This guy can get out of control, and I've seen it happen. He can take over an entire game. Deathbringer Thoctor, great addition to this deck. All right, so we've seen how we're going to make the tokens. We've seen how the tokens are going to die, and we've seen how we're going to take advantage of their death. What are we going to do with the tokens otherwise than just killing them? Well, let's talk about utilizing them as an army. And if we're going to utilize them as an army, then let's talk about Mirror Entity. For 2 and a white, this shapeshifter as a changeling has the ability to tap X, and until end of turn, creatures we control have base power toughness of XX. He can win the game for us. Mirror Entity can win the game. Speaking of cards that could win the game for us with a large token army that we're not going to sacrifice, maybe we're just going to attack with it instead, how about the Beastmaster Ascension? Whenever a creature we control attacks, this gets a quest counter. When Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters, our creatures are going to get +5/+5. Game ender. All right, so what else? Well, how about when our creatures enter the battlefield? Cathars Crusade for 3 and 2 white from Avacyn Restored. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So let's just look at this right here. We have Cathars Crusade in play, and we cast Finale of Glory where X is 10. We'll create 10 2/2 white soldiers and 10 4/4 white angels. So those 20 creatures go into play, and each one gets 20 counters. So that's 20, 22, 22 white soldier creatures, and 20, 24, 24 Serra Angel tokens. Cathars Crusade, win condition. And then, of course, I mean, if we're talking massive token armies, we would be remiss to not include Big Daddy CB, Crater Hoof Behemoth, straight from Avacyn Restored, 5 and 3 green. This 5/5 Hasty Beast, when it enters the battlefield, creatures we control gain trample and get +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. And this is probably one of the most prolific creatures to end games at commander tables all around the world. Crater Hoof Behemoth, win condition. 2 win conditions left for our 99 card deck, centered around that amazing woman right there. And that's going to be Purphoros, God of the Forge. With so many tokens coming into play, so many creatures coming into play, it's just natural to include a god that can deal 2 damage to every opponent for each creature that hits the battlefield under our control. This Theros original for 3 and a red gives us a 6/5 indestructible body that's not a creature unless our devotion to red is 5 or more. And again, whenever another creature enters the battlefield in our control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. But the 2 and a red for creatures we control getting +1/+0 until end of turn, not too shabby. But let's be honest, his primary inclusion is the 2 damage to each opponent. All right, Purphoros, God of the Forge. And lastly, because of the amount of mana that we can generate in this deck, our last win condition is Exsanguinate. X and 2 black from Scars of Merodin. Each opponent will lose X life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. All right, folks, that is MTG Burgeoning's Saskia the Unyielding Token Army Deck Tech. What say you? Do you have a Saskia the Unyielding deck? Is it combat centered? How do you run it? What suggestions would you make? What would you put in? What would you take out? Love to hear from you in the comments section. Saskia Token Army. This is MTG Burgeoning. Go forth and enjoy your day. What is an MTG Burgeoning Pack War? An MTG Burgeoning Pack War is a monthly YouTube series during which combatants are randomly assigned booster packs from the same Magic the Gathering set. It will never be Dragon's Maze. The combatant who opens the most valuable rare, mythic rare, or foil will receive every rare, mythic rare, and foil opened during that video. Example: if 12 combatants pack war, then one of these 12 individuals will receive every rare, mythic rare, and foil opened during the event, based on who opened the most valuable card. If 36 combatants pack war, then one individual will receive every rare, mythic rare, and foil opened during that video. How can I participate? Go to patreon.com below and join the Pack Wars tier for $5 per month. There are only 36 slots available. Each month beginning in July 2020, X contenders will prepare for war, X being the number of eligible patrons. Each patron who joins will be eligible for the following month's Pack War: and each following month thereafter if still a patron. As the number of patrons increases, so do the potential rewards. Prepare for battle! All card prices are as stated by TCG Player Mid at the time of opening. In the unlikely event of a tie, each deadlocked combatant will receive a bonus booster pack to help break the tie. The combatant who opens the most valuable rare, mythic rare, or foil from these bonus booster packs will break the tie and be awarded all rares, mythic rares, and foils opened during the video.